Why did the 12 most powerful nations on Earth, nations that had spent the previous decade pointing nuclear weapons at each other, suddenly agree on anything at all? Why did the United States and the Soviet Union, two governments that could not align on trade, on borders, on the most basic principles of human governance, find common ground on a continent that official scientific consensus described as nothing more than a vast, uninhabitable sheet of ice? Antarctica, a place that produces nothing, threatens no one, and, officially, holds no strategic value whatsoever. Then why is it the most formally restricted landmass on the planet? Subscribe right now. The next 20 minutes will connect dots you didn't know existed. You'll rewatch this. Don't miss what's coming. What you are about to hear is not speculation. Every discovery in this video is documented by scientists, by military records, by satellite data, and by the formal language of international treaties. What remains incomplete is the explanation. And in that gap between documented fact and official silence, something genuinely worth your attention has been hiding for decades. Antarctica is the 5th largest continent on Earth. It holds 70% of the planet's fresh water. Its ice sheet, in places, is 4 kilometers thick. And for the last 65 years, it has been governed by a treaty that prohibits military activity, restricts independent scientific access, and bans any sovereign territorial claim. All on a continent that, according to the governments who signed it, holds no particular value. We are going to walk through 7 documented anomalies, moving from diplomatic to geological to biological, and let the evidence speak for itself. In 1959, the 12 most powerful nations on Earth, including the United States and the Soviet Union, two governments that could not agree on the color of the sky, signed a binding international agreement covering an entire continent in under 18 months. Stop and consider that timeline. The Cuban Missile Crisis would not occur for another 3 years. The Berlin Wall had not yet been built. The Korean War had ended only 6 years prior. These were not cooperative governments. They were adversaries with fundamentally incompatible worldviews, competing for every square mile of strategic territory on the planet. And yet, the Antarctic Treaty was negotiated, drafted, and signed in 18 months, faster than most nations ratified domestic legislation. The treaty's stated purpose was peaceful scientific cooperation, and some of what it established is genuinely admirable. Antarctica remains one of the few land masses on Earth where no nation may station troops, conduct weapons tests, or claim sovereign territory. That part is in the public record and not disputed. What is also in the public record, and significantly less discussed, is what the treaty does not require. It does not require signatories to disclose what they discovered in Antarctica before 1959. It does not mandate the publication of geological survey data. It does not create any mechanism for independent civilian verification of what existing research stations are actually studying. The treaty created a framework for access. It did not create a framework for transparency. The irony here is that the document designed to make Antarctica an open continent contains more restriction clauses than most military agreements of the same era. By 1961, when the treaty entered into force, 7 nations had already made formal, though internationally unrecognized, territorial claims to sections of the continent. 3 of those claims overlapped. The treaty did not resolve those claims. It froze them, indefinitely in legal suspension. Which raises an obvious question. If Antarctica holds no strategic value, why did 7 nations bother claiming it in the first place? The official answer is scientific access and geographic proximity. But consider the year. These claims were filed between 1908 and 1943, before modern satellite mapping, before subglacial radar, before any of the discoveries we are about to examine. They were filed based on what those governments believed was beneath the ice. That belief, held by multiple competing governments, separately, before the public knew Antarctica was geologically interesting, is the thread that connects everything that follows. What was beneath the ice? The first answer came not from a diplomat, but from a drill site at the most remote research station on the planet. And what it produced rewrote our understanding of what isolation actually means. 4 kilometers beneath the East Antarctic ice sheet, there is a body of liquid water the size of Lake Ontario, and it has been completely isolated from the surface world for 15 million years. Lake Vostok, named after the Russian research station directly above it. Discovered in its full dimensions by British and Russian scientists in the 1990s using airborne radar, technology that could, for the first time, peer through kilometers of solid ice and map what lay beneath. The physics of Vostok's existence are already extraordinary. At 4 kilometers of depth, the pressure of the ice above is so immense that it actually lowers the freezing point of water, keeping the lake liquid despite temperatures at the surface that drop to minus 89 degrees Celsius, the coldest naturally occurring temperature ever recorded on Earth. Think of it this way. The weight of 4 kilometers of ice pressing down is performing the same function as the heating element in your kitchen. The lake stays liquid not despite the ice, but because of it. That is the physics. Now, consider the biology. In 2012, Russian scientists at the Vostok station completed a drilling project that had taken more than 2 decades. They reached the surface of the lake, the water-ice interface, and extracted ice core samples containing refrozen lake water. The biological analysis returned something unexpected. The samples contained bacterial DNA, not the DNA of known Antarctic surface organisms, not contamination from the drilling equipment, which had been extensively tested. The sequences included genetic material that matched no known species in existing databases, and, in at least one reported finding, sequences that bore only a 30% similarity to any cataloged organism on Earth. A 30% similarity. For context, humans and chimpanzees share 98% of their DNA. Humans and mushrooms share approximately 50%. Whatever was living in Lake Vostok, sealed from sunlight, sealed from the surface atmosphere, sealed from every evolutionary pressure that shaped life as we know it, had been developing along a completely separate biological trajectory for 15 million years. The Russian scientific team published preliminary findings. A full peer-reviewed data set has not been released. That absence of publication does not prove anything. Scientific peer review is a slow, rigorous process, and there are legitimate reasons why complete data sets take years to reach journals. But the combination, extraordinary preliminary findings, 15 million years of isolation, and an incomplete public record is precisely the kind of gap that careful attention deserves. Consider what that means. What Vostok demonstrated, beyond any specific finding, is something with profound implications for how we understand life itself. The conditions required for biological survival are far broader than any textbook written before 1990 would have predicted. Life does not need sunlight. It does not need surface pressure. It does not need any connection to the world above. If life can persist for 15 million years under 4 kilometers of ice in Antarctica, then every planet, every moon, every celestial body we previously dismissed as too cold or too dark for life becomes a candidate. The search for extraterrestrial biology did not begin in outer space. It began at a drill site in East Antarctica. And Vostok, as it turns out, is not even the strangest thing beneath the ice. In 2006, NASA satellite gravity mapping detected a mass concentration beneath the East Antarctic ice sheet so large, so dense, and so geometrically regular that the standard scientific explanation, a meteor impact crater, does not fully account for its dimensions. The anomaly lies beneath Wilkes Land in the eastern section of the continent. Its dimensions, calculated from gravitational data, place it at approximately 480 kilometers across, roughly the width of the state of Ohio, buried under more than 1.5 kilometers of ice. For comparison, the Chicxulub crater in Mexico, the impact site widely accepted as responsible for the extinction of the dinosaurs, measures approximately 180 kilometers across. The Wilkes Land object is nearly 3 times larger. The mass concentration at its center, the gravitational bullseye, suggests an object of extraordinary density relative to the surrounding geology. This is consistent with a large metallic meteor. It is also consistent with other geological structures that produce similar gravitational signatures. What it is not fully consistent with is the precise symmetry of the anomaly's shape. Impact craters are not perfectly regular. The angle of impact, the composition of the incoming object, the geological characteristics of the target surface, all of these variables produce craters with irregular edges, asymmetrical profiles, and variable density distribution. The Wilkes Land anomaly's gravitational map is more uniform than most documented impact sites of comparable scale. This does not mean it is not a crater. The leading scientific hypothesis remains that it is, likely from a meteor strike approximately 250 million years ago, coinciding with the Permian-Triassic extinction event, the largest mass extinction in Earth's history. That correlation is scientifically significant and actively studied. What it means is that the published data contains features the standard model does not entirely explain. And that is worth noting precisely because the scientists who published it said so themselves. Now stop and translate that into physical reality. A geological structure 3 times the size of the Chicxulub crater, the impact that ended the age of dinosaurs, sitting beneath the ice of Antarctica, geometrically regular in ways that standard impact models do not fully account for. Discovered by satellite gravity mapping, the general public had no reason to examine until a 2006 research paper drew attention to it. The scientific community is actively investigating. The data is publicly available. The models are incomplete by the researchers' own admission. And the ice above it, moving, shifting, carrying whatever evidence exists at the surface of that structure deeper into the geological record with every passing decade, is not waiting for the investigation to conclude. There is a particular kind of unease that comes not from conspiracy, but from legitimate scientific incompleteness. The Wilkes Land anomaly produces exactly that kind of unease, because the people best equipped to explain it are the first to acknowledge that they have not yet fully done so. But the most unsettling part is still ahead. Because while Wilkes Land raises questions about what struck Antarctica 250 million years ago, the next set of anomalies raises questions about what is happening there right now, and why multiple independent data sources, examined in sequence, keep pointing toward the same pattern. In 1911, a Norwegian geologist discovered a waterfall bleeding from the Taylor Glacier, dark red water flowing from a source 4 kilometers inside the ice, in a region where liquid water should not exist. Blood Falls. The name is exactly as accurate as it sounds. The water is the color of oxidized iron, a deep, arterial red, and it has been flowing continuously for over a century without any visible external source. The scientific explanation, confirmed through core sampling, is genuinely remarkable. Beneath the Taylor Glacier lies a pocket of hypersaline water, salt concentration 3 times higher than the ocean, trapped and isolated for approximately 1.5 million years. The salinity keeps it liquid at temperatures well below freezing. The red color comes from iron-rich minerals in the subglacial bedrock, oxidizing as they meet the water at the outflow point. What the biological analysis found inside that water is what moved Blood Falls from geological curiosity to something considerably more significant. The isolated ecosystem contains 17 species of microbial life, organisms surviving without sunlight, without oxygen, in water so salty it would be lethal to virtually every surface organism on Earth. Their metabolism runs on iron and sulfate. They breathe rust. The implications for astrobiology were immediate. If life can sustain itself on chemical energy alone, in water more extreme than any ocean, in complete darkness, then the subsurface oceans of Europa and Enceladus, moons of Jupiter and Saturn, known to contain liquid water beneath their ice shells, are no longer abstract candidates. They are plausible addresses. Antarctica keeps providing the blueprint. The Antarctic pyramids, 4-sided mountain peaks in the Ellsworth Range, whose geometric angles have circulated widely in satellite imagery, are, by the consensus of geologists, the product of a natural process called frost weathering. Rock exposed to repeated freeze-thaw cycles fractures along natural fault lines, producing angular faces. The scientific consensus is well supported. What is less discussed is why private expedition permits to that specific region have remained administratively restricted since the early 2000s, and why the official scientific explanation arrived with unusual speed for a question that had been publicly circulating for fewer than 72 hours. Operation Highjump, Admiral Richard Byrd's 1946-47 naval expedition, deployed 4,700 men, 13 ships, and 33 aircraft to a continent that official policy described as scientifically interesting but strategically neutral. The expedition was recalled 8 months ahead of schedule. Casualties occurred. The full debrief remains classified. Byrd's subsequent congressional testimony described Antarctica in strategic terms he declined to elaborate on for the public record. Then there are the thermal anomalies, subglacial heat signatures detected by satellite infrared mapping that do not correspond to known volcanic activity at those coordinates. Several of the precise locations were subsequently blurred in commercial mapping applications. Not removed, blurred. The distinction matters. Removal suggests intent. Blurring suggests a decision made after the fact. 4 separate data points, each with a partial explanation, none with a complete one. What connects the Antarctic Treaty, Lake Vostok, the Wilkes Land anomaly, Blood Falls, Operation Highjump, and the thermal signatures is not a theory. It is a pattern. Each of these anomalies was discovered independently by separate research teams using different methodologies. None were announced. Each was published in specialist journals and reached the general public only through secondary reporting or satellite data analysis performed outside official channels. And in each case, the official response followed the same structure. An initial explanation, technically defensible but incomplete, followed by institutional silence on the remaining questions. That is not evidence of concealment. Institutional silence has many explanations. Funding cycles are slow. Peer review is slow. The logistics of Antarctic research, one of the most physically demanding scientific environments on Earth, are genuinely prohibitive. Most unanswered questions in Antarctic science are unanswered because answering them is extraordinarily difficult, not because anyone decided they shouldn't be. But consider the aggregate: 7 anomalies, 7 instances of data exceeding its official explanation, 7 cases where the scientific record contains a published finding, followed by an incomplete public account. The individual explanations are plausible. The cumulative pattern is harder to dismiss. The Antarctic Treaty, now signed by 54 nations, restricts independent civilian access in ways that no equivalent international agreement does for any other landmass on Earth. You cannot charter a private scientific expedition to Wilkes Land. You cannot independently drill near Vostok. The treaty's restriction clauses are enforced not by any single government, but by international consensus, which means no single government can be held responsible for what those restrictions prevent. Stop and hold that thought. That is an unusual governance structure for a place that officially holds no strategic value. The most consequential scientific discoveries emerging from Antarctica in the last 3 decades, extremophile biology, subglacial hydrology, gravitational anomalies, atmospheric data, are each rewriting a scientific field in ways with direct implications for space exploration, for our understanding of Earth's deep history, and for what we consider biologically possible. The continent described as worthless in 1959 is now the most scientifically significant piece of real estate on Earth. That reclassification happened slowly, through data. The governance structure restricting access to it has not changed at all. Antarctica is not a mystery in the conspiratorial sense, a secret kept by people who already know the answer. It is a mystery in the oldest sense, a place where the questions are real, the data is real, the gap between them is real, and no one has yet had the resources, the access, or perhaps the institutional permission to close it. What that reveals about us is this: we are most comfortable with mysteries that are either fully solved or fully unsolvable. Antarctica is neither. It sits in the territory between documented enough to raise genuine questions, restricted enough to prevent the answers, and ancient enough that the ice will outlast every treaty ever signed above it. The ice sheet moves, 3 meters per year, carrying whatever lies at its base toward the sea, indifferent to the agreements made by governments on its surface. It does not respond to classification levels. It does not honor restricted access zones. It moves, and it carries, and eventually it reveals. What it will reveal, and when, is the only question Antarctica has not yet answered. The ice does not keep secrets. It keeps time. The next mystery is already waiting. Subscribe now and be there when we open it.